Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this channel. I recently got some requests to cover a story regarding an uptick in conservatism for 12th grade boys, especially when in comparison to similarly aged girls. I think this is a fascinating story, and we're going to be reacting to the segment that Saagar of Breaking Points did. Let's get into that reaction, and I'm going to provide a bunch of my own thoughts as well.
I worry a lot here on Breaking Points about polarization, red versus blue. It's the easiest form to discuss, but in reality, the way that polarization really affects our lives is all the little ways that we start to hate each other, from dating preferences to where you will live, to the type of car that you will buy, to which school that you will send your kids to. Polarization actually divides us in a more fundamental way than we often tend to realize. And I often said that polarization today is best understood by a single question. Did you attend a 4-year college degree or not? The answer to that question is probably the single best determinant of how you voted in 2020. If you did
Wow.
statistically,
Look
you're
at
much
that
more likely to
chart.
vote.
You know, this is a widely known fact that men and women differ in their political dispositions. Men tend to be more conservative, women tend to be more liberal. What is often not discussed is why. Why are more femininely tempered people attracted to liberal ideas? Why are more masculinely tempered individuals attracted to conservative ideas? There are so many variables involved in the answering of this question, but one of the main things that tends to differentiate masculinity and femininity is what each craves. Masculinity, and thus more men, tend to desire freedom and the ability to pursue an adventurous, sometimes dangerous lifestyle, whereas women crave safety. And you will see this dichotomy reflected in our political divisions everywhere you look. Think about the difference between conservatives and liberals on COVID. You had liberal types, you need to mask up. COVID is very dangerous. This can kill you if you're not careful. You had conservatives saying, nah, my immune system's going to handle it. I don't need to mask. I'm going to go out there. I'm a strong individual. The liberals were more focused on safety. The conservatives were more focused on preserving freedom and adventure. You can think about this in terms of the jobs that men and women tend to seek out. Men are much more likely to take up dangerous occupations. That's why a vast majority of the workplace deaths, over 90%, are men. That's why most men are the ones going off to war and sacrificing themselves for the country. They are more willing to put themselves in these risky situations, and they enjoy it more, generally speaking. Men are more likely to do risky driving activities. Women are more likely to work in fields of medicine, fields with people, becoming a psychologist, trying to take care of people, trying to keep people safe. This is one of the core differences between masculinity and femininity, men and women, and thus it is also one of the main divisions between liberals and conservatives, reflected on this map.
If you did statistically, you're much more likely to vote Democrat. And if you didn't, statistically more likely to support Trump. Where there are important exceptions, and overall it's good as we got. But increasingly, another factor is actually beginning to emerge that could really hurt us. What gender are you? As you could actually see from those maps, if only women voted Democrats would win by a huge margin. If only men voted, the same would happen for Republicans. So once again, there are important exceptions to this rule, but the more true that it becomes, the bigger problems you are going to have. In fact, the more that I'm looking at emerging data, I'm realizing we've never actually been less racially polarized as a country, which is not a bad thing, but within races, we are actually polarizing amongst very different lines. Take Latino voters, for example. The two big predictors of whether a Latino voted for Trump in 2020 are, did you attend college or not, and are you a man or a woman? The same is true for
what kinds of values are being peddled within these liberal academic institutions? Well, I just described in the name. Liberal values are going to be espoused. If you don't go to college, you're probably not going to college either because you don't have the resources to do so, or you think it's a waste of time, you don't want to be propagandized by the left. Therefore, what ends up happening? This divergence.
For white voters. Increasingly, we see signs of this trend even amongst black voters. Andrew Breitbart once famously said, "Politics is downstream of culture." In this divide, I think it's becoming even more clear. What stunned me was not just that this is true for adults, but it appears true even for the emerging generation of teenagers, who much has been talked and written about as the great liberal hope. If you're talking about just women, that might be true. But some new data unearthed by Daniel DeVise at The Hill, buried within the Monitoring the Future survey from the University of Michigan, finds that the political identities of 12th grade boys differs starkly from the political identities of 12th grade girls. The Michigan survey finds, quote, 12th grade boys are nearly twice as likely to identify as conservative versus liberal. Now, it's important that many people don't identify as anything. Important to note that. Conservative standing still only is approximately 1/4. Liberal is at 13%. But it's important designator whenever you put it up against women. For girls, it could actually be more different, as the survey finds.
This is pretty unbelievable to watch just how much these categories have diverged. Pretty stable, oscillating over a 30 to 40 year period, and then boom, just straight up from when? The rise of social media, the rise of platforms like Instagram and TikTok. Now let's go back to the male graph. If you go back to the 70s, it appears as if there were more liberal men than conservative men, which is really something. And this was right after psychedelics had been made illegal across the country. It was also right around that Vietnam War times. And so I think there was a lot more anti-war sentiment and generally hippie vibes.
12th grade girls who identify as liberal rose from 19% in 2012 to 30% in 2022. Only 12% of girls identified as conservative in last year's survey. So effectively, the polar opposite of what's going on with boys. What's interesting is not the divide, but how actually new the divide is. As they note, quote, as recently as late 2000s, liberal boys occasionally outnumbered conservatives, and back in the Carter era, both boys and girls were leaning towards liberal. As researcher Jean Twenge actually found in a new book published Generations, the difference in attitudes between 12th graders has never been bigger than today. What's really interesting is that over a 5-year period, girls became slightly more liberal, but it's boys in particular who became much more conservative. So this explains actually a lot about today. A lot of trends like the Liver King. And
at some point, you knew this was going to happen. If you raise boys throughout their entire elementary, middle school, high school years to take on more feminine temperament, if you peddle these kinds of ideas down their throat that conflict with underlying biology that exists deep within them, at some point you're going to get a backlash. That backlash has arrived. My only concern is that these ideals on the left have become so tarnished that there won't be enough men moving forward to promote something both masculine and innovative. That's sort of how I see myself here on the channel. I want to make liberalism great again. And I don't want to drift too far to the right. Someone like Dave Rubin came along. He tried to brand himself as a liberal and then a classical liberal. He soon drifted off totally to the right, standard conservative at this point. And he would say, well, no, I didn't leave the left left me. There is a way to acknowledge the wisdom of conservatives while not totally being subsumed by their cultural movements.
Now, it is really as if worlds are colliding. And to once again answer that question, why should you even care about gender gaps in politics or in education? Because it profoundly influences who dates who, and thus who is going to reproduce, or even if that's attainable. A college graduate, for example, on average, 43% less likely to date someone who is, quote, a Republican than the average American. It jumps up to 65% for the term, quote, is a Trump supporter.
Smokes cigarettes, 90% of college graduates. I think the science is clear on that smoking isn't very good for the lungs. Does not trust vaccines. That's quite a separation. Who's willing to date outside of their own political party? The liability of being a Republican is significantly larger than the liability of being a Democrat, which really indicates that becoming a college graduate in some way makes you more close-minded with the prospect of dating a Republican. That's at least what the data show.
Date someone who's, quote, a Republican than the average American. It jumps up to 65% for the term, quote, is a Trump supporter. Dating and political polarization amongst gender lines creates a dramatic mismatch in the availability of mates, both genders, as they age up to the point where they desire a permanent partner. And while I support people's right to be single, of course, if they want to, the data tells us that people who are single longer and throughout their lives are less happy, less likely to report satisfaction in life, more likely to suffer from health problems, suffer worse overall lifetime earnings, and suffer on a myriad of other key quality of life metrics. So what can we do about this? I honestly don't know. Richard Reeves has some great ideas in his book about how to stop gender
Hmm.
imbalances in schools and higher education, but I think it goes way deeper than that. Culture is telling men that they're not wanted, and they're responding accordingly by becoming both less desirable as mates and becoming more self loathing and angry with the internet as a vehicle.
I don't think it's just certain men are checking out of the dating market and becoming completely undesirable. I think part of it is that there's a massive divide between men who are both incredibly attractive and those who are completely undesirable and unattractive. There are unbelievable discrepancies in status that are being seen right now. The hierarchies are getting extremely imbalanced. There's a lot of money being made online. There's a lot of money being made in places where physical attractiveness, appearance is important. Your face, to some extent, is your moneymaker in the modern era. And if you're not getting good messaging on that front, you're going to lose all motivation. You're going to completely check out. It's rough. It's rough out there for a lot of young men. It's rough out there for women too, but the expectation is still upon men to make more money. Women still want men who are making more money, and that's a pressure. It's a burden. Hypergamy
Was a symptom of this disease.
Andrew
Liver
Tate
King
was
and
a
many other
symptom
scam
of the
artists to come
disease.
and go since. Step one, at least, is acknowledging that we have a problem. It's okay to be a man, and it's also okay to care about men.
If we have any more suggestions as to what you want me to talk about and react to, definitely post those below. I'm going to be reacting to more Vivek because it seems that those interviews are being watched. But I also don't want to solely rely on that reaction content to get views. I want this to be a well fleshed out, nuanced channel where we're talking about both right wing and left wing concerns. And I'm a liberal who's going to be offering what I hope is a fair analysis of these issues. Thanks for your attention to this point, and I'll see you in the next one.